Okay, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the PAU Cafe at Trentham Gardens here in Staffordshire. Thanks for joining us, everybody that's in the room with us this evening, and our panellists that we've got here, who we will be chatting with after the film shortly. So, format for this evening, if you're watching online at home, is that shortly we're going to live stream the first showing of the film Closing the Gap, which is a short piece about the junior cycling team that we've been sponsoring over the course of the year. And then we will come back live to the room here and we will be chatting to our panellists about all things junior cycling. So on the panel this evening, going from left to right, I've got Phil West, who is a race coach at World Tour Team DSM. We've got Sir Bradley Wiggins, who I'm sure needs no further introduction. And then we've got Felix Earth, who was one of the riders on our junior cycling team here in the UK this year. So without further ado, let's go to the big screen and watch the film. Okay, thanks everybody for joining us and for sharing that first showing of the film. I guess going straight to the panel, if I can get you guys to grab your microphones. I'm going to go to start with to Phil and to Brad and ask you how that looks compared to you guys both raced at a very high level as juniors. How does that compare to the racing scene when you were doing this?
Yeah, I think a lot. I was getting changed in the back of my dad's car in some car park and just putting cordial in my bottle and a Mars bar in my pocket. And then we just think, well, what can we do today? So structurally, it's changed a lot. I think the reasons why we get into cycling and why we're in the sport are pretty much the same. But the implementation on the ground at that time is very different, especially to something as organised as this.
And so I think that's a great point to raise. But what you said, the motivation is the same. And what was that motivation for you?
I think Bradley mentioned it in the start of the video. It's actually the same thing that I was motivated by watching Chris Boardman. You look up to your Olympic heroes, don't you? And what's presented to you, and so Tour de France on Channel 4, Olympics coverage, and Chris Boardman really broke through the barrier there in terms of putting track cycling in a place where you thought it was achievable. And so that's where you start. And then in the end, for some people, like Bradley, it's possible to achieve that, but for others it's not. But it's about the pathway a little bit. But I think your inspiration is where you start, and then what you do next is...
I think that's a good point. I think to answer your question, nothing's changed from that point of view. Those guys are still, aspiring to do what we did. And that's an overriding constant emotion within the junior peloton, really, and it will be today. And going back to Chris Boardman, once success inspires, breeds success, and because Chris Boardman lived in Hoylake on the Wirral, it made you think that you were capable of doing it coming from wherever you came from, and now cycling has got to the level it's got to. You've got the Tom Pidcocks of this world, Geraint Thomases, Luke Rose, and there's so many of them that everyone thinks that it just makes you believe that you're capable of doing it. But other than Chris Boardman, we had Sean Yates, Robert Miller at that time in the 90s, and before that, of course, Barry Hobans of this world and Tommy Simpsons. But they seemed a bit different. They weren't the people next door, because they all lived in France, and there was this sort of belief when we were juniors that you had to go abroad if you wanted to make it. And so many didn't make it, that were surpassed lots of us lot certainly. And current bike riders in terms of talent, Chris Walker's of this world, Malcolm Elliott, obviously he did make it, but never fulfilled his full potential. David Rayner, as I say, there was always this thing that if you wanted to make it, you had to go to France or Italy. And then Chris Boardman changed that a bit because he lived in the UK. He was the only foreign professional that lived in the UK and travelled out. So from Chris Boardman doing that, now it's commonplace that most people, other than tax reasons, they moved to Monaco. But back then, you lived in the UK. Most people who lived in the UK and commuted. So I think nothing's really changed from that point of view. These guys watch, all our flock of British riders racing and feel that, if they can do it, we can do it. And Tom Pidcock at the moment, from watching my lad Ben race, Tom is, like the messiah in terms of, what they're capable of doing, because he's closer to them in that generational terms.
And so I guess just again, it's always interesting to sort of set the context. what was the pathway for you guys? So you've got that Chris Boardman Olympic medal, turned pro. Was it obvious to you guys in your generation what you needed to do to get to where you wanted to be?
Yeah, well, I think one man ran the show then, Doug Daly. And then he had a couple of whipping boys. Marshall Thomas was one of them. And but Doug Daly, I mean, I said it the other week. When I did the Hall of Fame thing at British Cycling, you got a letter in the post, didn't you, from British Cycling saying you've made it to junior training sessions in Manchester. So you've been invited to train with the squad. And you got invited at 15 and you'd go and train. So my first session in 1995, I went up to Manchester, stayed in a youth hostel because that was about the budget they stretched to.
Hopwood Hall, I think it was.
And Phil was the best junior in the country at that time. He won 4 national titles that year in 1995 on the track. And did the junior worlds and that. So we turned up at the junior squad session. I was 15, Phil was the current, and Phil like ran the show, you know, he was... I remember you said hello to me on the steps coming to the track centre, and I was like, Phil's just said hello to me. I didn't have a northern accent, but...
Working on that, though, aren't
yeah.
we? Working on.
And it was... So then you got grouped, you know, so you had the top group, you know, you not leading all that. And all we used to do was fly in 2Ks as a 4-up. And we worked for all the groups. And so that, you saw what your pathway was. You know, I could be like Phil West and go to the Junior Worlds this year, or next year, and then the year after if you had 2 or 3 years as a junior. So it was always that. It was always looking up to your peers. And that's no different now.
And what about for obviously you guys both came from a very strong track background, but what for road cyclists that weren't kind of suited to the track? Was it?
You have to go abroad. Yeah, it was like you have to find a team abroad and go and race in France and try and make your way, learn the language and come back with a contract. And those lads that came back without a contract and slipped back into British racing were always deemed sort of failures in many ways. And it was a shame really because so many missed the boat like that. And you know, you didn't know. Not many British riders got offered contracts back then, like they do now. You know, the peloton's saturated with every nation now. But back then, it was. You know, you went to a French team. It was very rare. I mean, I was the first British rider at France Jeux. Apparently, I only found this out the other day. But there's about 8 there now. And but it's great, you know, that they are looking. And France Jeux were the first to look outside of France at foreign riders, and that was with Anglophones anyway. And Bradley McGee was the first to go there in the late 90s, and then they took Baden Cook, myself, and they set a precedent, and Cofidis did the same thing, and it's aided British cycling getting so much bigger, is having placements and riders in teams in Europe.
Okay, so I guess that's looking at things as they were at the start of your career. It's probably a good place to bring Felix into the conversation. So coming into the sport, what was your route into the sport?
So my dad used to race, and he was probably my age, and then he stopped, and then he kind of got back into it when I was getting back into it, that kind of like 8 or 9 age. So it was really nice we kind of got back into it together, and I just kind of like, as he kind of started doing more, I kind of started doing more and doing the more regular races, and you start like seeing how you like train efficiently, and you just start like, as you get older and older, you start just like doing better and better and better and more and more and more and stuff.
And has it been obvious, was it obvious to you coming into it, and is it obvious to you now where it is that you need to be going and what you need to be doing to get to the point you want to in the sport?
I think like the more you get older and the more you speak to people, you definitely know more on what you need to do to get there. Obviously when you're like 8 or 9, you're not really thinking what you need to do to become world champ. You just want to be world champ. And then as you kind of like grow up through the sport, you start like breaking it down and kind of starting to work backwards and the step by steps and what you need to do to get to that step, to then get to that step, to then become world champ. So yeah, that's what I think.
And I guess that's an interesting moment to kind of look at how the sport is now. And there's, I think, a perception that the best riders are going to move forward straight from the junior ranks straight into the world tour. So I guess Brad, as an incredibly talented junior that kind of trod a version of that path, and for Phil, is that how it is now?
I think guys like Remco and maybe Tadej, Remco more recently, there's also other juniors out there who just directly are super as a junior and can make that transition in some way. And it's almost, as a perceptually, it can feel like it's the norm a little bit. as if that's just what happens. So then there's this urgency to be the best in the world as a junior because that's the only way in. And I think those, those talents, those freaks actually, do make that challenging actually for the rest of the population because perceptually you think that's the way you need to go.
And what, I guess your take from your point of view, Brad, did you, because I guess your journey into the pro ranks was, I was going to say stop-start. You had the Linda McCartney experience.
Yeah. My pathway was set from, 92. I was obsessed with the Olympic Games. That's what I wanted to become an Olympian. I think that was something that I mean, the road cycling part of it as well. Yeah, I always wanted to go and end up doing the Tour de France one day and that. But the Olympics, I think, meant more to me before going. I always saw the Olympics as if I make the Olympic team, either Atlanta or 2000 in Sydney, get Olympic medal or get my ride at the Olympic Games, and then focus on the road and leave the track behind. That was always the plan, and that was always that was traditionally what you were told to do. Doug Daly told me to do that. He was ran British cycling, and so. Yeah, after Atlanta Olympics and seeing the team there, they obviously didn't do that well there. Just to say you've been to the Olympic Games back then was quite a lot, really. And don't forget, this was before the lottery funding came in 97. So our British Olympic teams were basically paying their way to Atlanta. They would get their airfare, but the guys would rally around in the weeks before and get their bikes all sprayed the same colour. They certainly did for Atlanta, just so they looked like a team. And the sport's come a long way since then, really, in terms of, ride. I mean, lots of the guys in the Atlanta team pursuit had jobs outside of cycling or earned enough money and prize money. So it's the funding definitely helped, and that timing for me was everything. The timing of lottery funding coming along at 17. By 18, I went to the Junior Worlds, and I was the only one who went to the Junior Worlds because they couldn't afford, even at that point, with the money, to send any riders to the Junior Worlds. So I was the only one who went in 97, 98. Phil had gone in 95. I won the Junior Worlds in 98. But really the programme was taking off then, world-class performance. So there was a pathway by that point, and Peter Keane was running it. And I could see a natural pathway, and they were steering me towards that to make it the Olympic team in 2000. So, and the timing of that and the age I was at, it couldn't have been better for me. And lots of people missed the boat because of their age when that came along.
And do you feel that by turning pro at the age that you did and in the way that you did, having been focused so much on the track, do you feel that you went into the pro ranks still having a lot to learn? As a road
I was very
cyclist?
naive, yeah. But I also knew there was a lot to learn, and I think you always knew that then as well. Lots of riders, the first 2 years of your pro career was always about learning the trade, and there was never any aspirations of doing anything your first 2 years as a professional. And that was the norm, And I think, as Phil just said, that the sport has changed completely from that point of view, because riders come in now and they want to win straight away, whereas then you had to work your way up. And if you did one or two big races, that was the highlight of your year. And so the sport has flipped totally from that point of view. And now riders, the young Josh Tarling and that, who's to sign with Ineos, there was no sort of easing his way in. I think he was doing the Giro within 2 years, world medalist, winning races already. And it's crazy the contracts they're on as well from that young age. They get signed. So back then you hoped to get a NAO contract, it was £1,000 a month, and you stayed on that for 2 years. But so the sport has completely changed from guys like Pogacar and all that winning races so young. So it's made everyone feel, now it's a burnout sport, I was talking to my lad the other day about what we think Pogacar, people look at his age and think, God, he's got another 10 years yet. Ben seemed to think he was going to be burnt out by 30, because how can you keep up that rate of winning? 35 races he won this year. It's bonkers, And how many seasons can you have like that before you go, do you know what, I'm sick of going off the front with 80k to go? Yeah. And he's been doing that since he turned professional. When I did the Eurosport in 2019 at the Vuelta, he went off the front and won 3 stages in very similar fashion, And it's, at what point do you get bored of winning like that, So it's a tough one, but it's now trickled down, and like guys like that are 18, 19, I think, right, within 3 or 4 years, I need to be, if I want to be competitive, because when guys are winning the Tour at 21, 22. you haven't got 10 years to learn. I won the Tour at 32. So when I look back, if someone had said you've got 12 years yet to learn your trade before you have to worry about performing, it's a tough one.
To hand that on to Phil, how has that change kind of manifested itself in your day-to-day, in terms of the changing ways that riders come to you as a team?
Well, actually, as a team, we've always had a real belief in our development team. So in the classic mould of what a Conti team used to be, so like under 23 riders. So for us, it's still about talent scouting, and actually a crop of our riders in that World Tour team now have come through that development team. But underneath that, they were always scouting for the next best talent, the next young talent. We actually almost signed Josh Tarling before he went to Ineos, you know, so you're in the same territory. You're trying to pick, everybody's trying to pick off the next best talent. But I think within that, for us, our process is really about talent development. And Paul and I were talking a bit before. Are you in talent acquisition or are you in talent development? And you know, if you got the most money, then you can buy the best riders. But if you haven't got the most money, then you need to develop riders. And so I think that's something from a junior forwards or upwards, it's really important, because you need to have a pathway. You need to either have a pathway through a team, or at least know what your pathway is, what your process is. And so, yeah, we're quite lucky in that sense, because our development team feeds our team.
How confident are you, when you do develop those riders, that they're not going to get poached for bigger bucks? I mean, has that happened?
Yeah, that's happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's the problem with the influx of money in the sport now. Like we've seen with Red Bull and Ineos, they were just buying up anyone who could breathe.
That's a real challenge, and that's where agents are tricky, actually. And that's hard with the dialogue. But Josh Tarling was an example of that, actually. It's fair enough. It's how it goes sometimes. Everybody's there to make money. But I think we had a similar rider, a German rider, who was the next best thing. He was 2 years after Remco, I think, that sort of age. Won everything as a junior. And we signed him and went directly into the World Tour team. And we really wanted him to stay in the development team to learn his trade a bit and learn the pathway. But the agent really pushed, because we've got these offers from another team. And it didn't work in the end. It didn't work for him as a rider, because he'd missed those steps. And in the end, he got bought out of his contract. To be fair, we didn't want to keep him anymore, because but he got bought out by a big team.
Do you know do you know of, or do you ever look down as close into the junior ranks and sign riders up? You know, like football do now. You get players in the Man City academy that are 12. I was with Jason Robinson, the ex-rugby player, the other day, and his son is in the Manchester academy, and they pay £90,000 a year towards living expenses, education, and all that sort of stuff at 12 years of age. And I wonder if there'll ever become a day where, you're talking about development of riders, you start signing up in the junior ranks already. Because I think the only rider I can remember that ever signed with Mapai as a junior was Filippo Pozzato.
Yeah.
Do you sign riders from junior?
Yeah, but we signed them as a Devo rider with a view to. So that's something we did with Max Poole, actually. Yeah. We signed him to do 2 years as a Devo. His third year would be World Tour. So already you kind of be muted, probably for the best. But I think the question is, where does that stop? Because it just becomes an arms race. Yeah. And in the end, like this Spanish guy that UAE have signed this year, Torres, I think it's called, won L'Avenir, or nearly didn't win L'Avenir, but he won the last stage in some dramatic way. Bahrain have done it quite a few times, and I think those are the guys that you can't afford, actually. No. They're already training on their team bike, and we know where he's going next year.
It's almost child abuse signing up 12-year-olds, isn't it? Really, you know, right? You're doing the Tour de France in 10 years' time, son. Yeah. You know, I mean, if you flip it like that, it's at what point do you let kids have their childhood as well as enjoying the sport and loving it and staying in it long term? You know, that if this doesn't make out, I've got friends in cycling that, you know, are made for life. You know, some of my closest friends are the ones we were racing the juniors. You know, Jamie Alberts, Steve Cummins. You know, and it's the bonds you form for the rest of your life. You must have done it, Felix.
Yeah, definitely. Like the amount of. So all the boys that were on the documentary last year, like, we all get along super well. We're on the same team again this year. And I think that you'll know, you've been on teams with people you don't like, and like that must be so hard to actually like want to like work for someone or try and help them out when you think like they're.
But it's
like,
funny. There were so many people I didn't like, right? And then you room with them, or they come to your team, and you go, actually, so I put a few drinks in him. He's great. You know,
Yeah,
and it's funny how
true.
you don't really know anyone when you're racing, and everyone's got a front on and a veil, and their performance veil. But actually behind it all, we're all human, and it's funny, we're all pitching for the same thing. And when you're doing that, even in the Sky ranks, me and Chris Froome demonstrated really well publicly. People don't get on, but we get on great now. We don't cycle, but he's still going, isn't he? But I mean, it's funny how competition and rivalry and ambition can just get in the way of actually, I don't care, I don't like you, but it's most of the time it's from a competitive reason.
Mm-hmm.
But you sound like you got on with them all this year, did you?
Yeah, it's like
Who were the ones you didn't like? Go on. Relive on the telly.
no, like I think that's like super rare. Like obviously a very limited experience, but from what I know, like super rare to get on with all your teammates, and like I actually would want, if I wasn't going to win, obviously, like want them to win. Like they're all super nice guys, and that definitely helps working together.
I was going to do a little exercise of talking about those juniors that are coming through, either into the development ranks, Phil, or straight into World Tour. And Felix, ask you to have a punt first before Phil probably answers this question. What are the qualities that you think teams, or what do you think teams are looking for when they're signing riders?
Well, I think cycling is very different to other sports in the fact that you can, whereas football or rugby or most sports, you have to be seen by a team. They have to see you play the sport. Whereas I think in cycling, it's quite niche that you can have really good numbers and then send that to a team, and then all of a sudden, ears are up, and you've got a foot in the door. I think they would, Phil would check, but they wouldn't just sign a rider from numbers, but then you get to go on a team camp, and then they like test you, and then one thing leads to the other, and you're riding in some nice DSM kit, and
A rubber dub. Yeah, it's interesting. I think it's fair that the first shop window is numbers, isn't it? And all results. Old school used to be results, who's won French Cup or something like that. Now it's quantifiable everywhere, and everybody knows if you can push this number, then you're good. But I think from a DS point of view, I see it a little bit different because, there's guys in teams, in my team, who've got great numbers, but they're an absolute nightmare. They're not a good teammate, they're hard work, and not everybody can be a winner. And so, UAE wouldn't function if it had 21 Pogacars. They'd win a lot of races, actually, but the function would be terrible. And so, in amongst that, and I think the analogy Felix just made there, like the football team, like when you see what's going on in the field of play and how each person plays their role, that's what defines you as a rider. I think the hardest part about being a junior trying to break into that is your first step is almost the hardest because you got to step into by virtue of physicality or results.
Do you know what, Phil? It's funny. I was going to ask you what you thought, because you're in the peloton, about Ineos and what the problem is there. Because my son was telling me the other day that Ineos has now built a reputation for young British riders not to go there because they just flog you for a couple of years and spit you out the other side. Yeah. And that's a shame now that the team of that that stature and history and culture is now putting British riders off wanting to go there because they've seen what's happened to some of the other riders. What do you make of the team?
So I think it's interesting. I mean, as you know, I've known this team since you were in it, and some of my mates also work there. But it has been interesting seeing the last 2 years. I think they're suffering from a hangover of the glory days, actually, and basically talented riders with good motivation and structure could dominate cycling. I think structure is the main thing, and to me, it looks like they don't have a structure when they go into races. That's not to bag them or say that the coach is not trying hard, because they're also good guys, but I do think sometimes it feels like the riders are running the ship, and I think actually that should be the other way around.
One particular rider you want to insert?
No. I could offer a few names, but I don't want to get myself in trouble. But I think there's definitely...
Steve Cummins left the team this year in July. I mean, he went to the Dauphiné, got sent home, and he's not been back since. And
Exactly.
Yes,
Also a friend of mine as well, and it was sad to see that.
Yeah, really sad, because Steve's a really good,
He's a good bloke.
great DS as well.
Yeah. But I think that, for me, was an example of clutching at straws.
Yeah, yeah.
And where they were like, something's got to change. Maybe there's a small internal struggle, and somebody took some decisions. That's also fair. We never know the full picture. But if I take a step back and think, how would I play? I think I'd just try and keep it to the basics. They've got a hat full of talented riders, and then, what do you do to get them on the start and work in a cohesive way?
Just to wind the conversation back to the point before about looking at junior riders and how riders come into the team, how much of the traffic, like what's the direction of traffic in terms of you looking for riders, or else how do riders come to your attention?
So we have a full-time talent scout in the team. He just goes around looking for talented bike riders, checking numbers, traipsing around junior races, under 23 races, and just going and meeting people and finding out and sniffing around. And then obviously there's traffic coming into the team, but we're also proactively going out there.
Burning question, does he ever make it across the channel to come and watch races in the UK?
I think he does a bit. I mean, if you look at our team, we've actually signed some pretty good British talents. And I think that's that little bit born out of having a team with like probably more British coaches than any other team. Yeah. It's also a little bit about relationships. Like if you're looking around at, and you know the coaches in British cycling, or you know like these guys, then it also comes a little bit like that. So you should always use your network as well.
One of the other things, just to move on to a slightly different topic that we've talked about a little bit, is the riders that don't make it. One thing, well, two aspects to that. One is what happens to those bike riders, and two is what, if anything, needs to change in the sport about what happens to those bike riders.
It's a tough one, yeah. The fallout rate's higher than it's ever been because of how competitive it's got. And I don't know, it's just a really tough one, that. I think the welfare side of it, even coming out of the pro ranks, is sort of very void, of anything. And I don't know what the answer to that one is, but it's coming back and managing the expectations of the riders, and that's what PAU's doing a great job of, is managing not just the expectations of these riders as cyclists, but as humans as well. As I said on the show there, on the film, that it's about giving them tools that's going to sustain them into the normal world afterwards if they don't make it. And a lot of the time that's just common sense, and educating them on what their worth is, other than what we can get out of you from a cycling sense. It's what their worth is as people, because lots of them stay in the sport and go on to be DSs, and there's other opportunities within the sport. But it's a tough one, because as competitive and as the sport is, there is only one way down after you get to the top, or strive for the top. But I tell you what's happening now as well. Ben was telling me the other day, I keep referencing Ben because he's the only reference point I have for cycling at the moment. And he was saying, we can't swear on here, we're live, aren't we? But he was saying the sport's effed, he said. He said it's going downhill, he thinks. It's become so competitive. So the racing is just there's a set pattern to the racing, and there's no off-season now. He said it's just one thing after another, constant. And it's tough, but it's always been tough. It was tough in a different way, Now I think he's at the age he's at. He's 19, 20 in March. He's saying that now because, as I said before, he hasn't got 12 years. We think, well, by the time I'm 32, 33, that's my time when I'm going to be in a pomp and trying to win the Tour. It's like, in 4 years, if I haven't got it and I'm not cutting the mustard, I'm not even going to, that's it. So people are seeing their window now of opportunity between 19 and 25, 26, because if you've got... And then you find a job for yourself within the sport. That might be as a domestique or riding to your 36 in the, in the service of someone else. But so it's really short.
And does that reflect your experience or your perception of the sport?
So I'm not giving you a great advertisement here for getting it to cycle.
But I guess it is that.
But one of the other things, so I'll just add to that. One of the other things he does see is you make it now. You find yourself a niche in the sport. You can get paid very handsomely and set yourself up for life and get out by the time you're 25, 26. So good money.
So is that how the sport looks from your end of the food chain, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, I know like one or two boys that have were good junior riders in the UK, and they haven't got like teams for next year, and they've just stopped, sacked it in. And I think as well, like we can all sit here and say that riders are winning the Tour de France young, but you don't have to win it young, and you can wait till you're a bit older. Not everyone's the same, but it's very hard to, when everyone is young winning, to believe what people are saying and to go, oh, it's okay, I have got 5 or 6, 7 years. Like mentally, like that's hard to accept.
I think it's like cycling can have a boom or bust mentality. I think you always feel that pressure that if you're not progressing or you're not getting a pro contract, then you're failing. I think that's what you said earlier on as well.
Yeah, exactly.
And if that's how you look at it, I think you will ultimately just fall off the train at some point. So I think it's important to have a bit of perspective about what it is. What do you want? What can you get? Because it's great. Everybody wants to be a world champion. That's why we started. But at some point, you have to recognise, maybe I'm not going to be a world champion, but what can I do? Yeah. And like as a coach, I've always tried to, you coach in different levels of riders, different mindset, different skills, different capabilities. So you always have to have a bit of an angle on that. And as a former talent coach, like I'm actually pretty proud that some of those riders who didn't make it to be good riders stayed in the sport and did other things and became coaches or became Swannies, or some of them are DSs, and that's kind of the inclusive thing about this pathway, this sport is it's not all just about being a world champion. That aspiration, inspiration starts somewhere, but at a certain moment you have to have perspective on what are my steps, what can I achieve, and you can earn really good money by being the best domestique or the second best domestique in the world. Yeah, you don't have to be a race winner. You can still be really valuable as a rider. But you have to know that. I think you have to know that when you're trying to take your next steps.
Do you find that there is often a big mismatch when riders arrive between what they think they're capable of or where they think they're going in the sport and what you guys are hiring them to do? And how do you manage that process? If that's...
I think it depends on how they've been successful before. And if they've won everything, or whether they've had to really fight. And the old phrase is hard work beats talent, but you can't beat a hard-working, talented rider. And I think it's just managing expectation. Like, it's unrealistic to think that you can really just win everything at junior and then directly step into winning at World Tour level. There's one or two guys who've been competitive directly, but they don't dominate. Nobody, it's hard to dominate. Like Tadej's doing a really good job of that now. And in certain races, there's 3 or 4 riders, and that's it, done. But just the pool's bigger, isn't it? As you go up the ladder, there's more riders at the same level. So then you have to find your way a little bit.
One thing that occurred to me when you were describing the sort of the process, as it were, is that you guys have got a feeder team, an under-23 development squad. By its very nature, not all of those riders are going to go on to ride for either DSM in the World Tour or for any other World Tour team. Do you, at that level, is the sport recruiting riders knowing that they're not that they're the cannon fodder for under 23 level?
I don't think you see it from that perspective. That's because I think that it's a very finite, slightly negative kind of outlook. If you did. Yeah, I think it's also the same in the pro peloton, isn't it? We know that at some point somebody's going to fall off the end of the conveyor belt, whether it's too old or they're not going to have sponsorship pulled or something. So in any strand of the sport that can come. But I think it just starts from seeing talented individuals and you think they've got a pathway, we can do something with that. It's what happens in those next steps and whether they convert something or whether you just the relationship doesn't work. Or it's just not their time and they need more time. And sometimes that's a thing. Like, if you have a 2-year contract, do you extend for 2 years and then you've got limitations on the age category and things like that? So there's a bit of a balancing act to have.
I'd like to change tack a little bit on the discussion. One of the things that motivated the creation of Team PAU was the observation that that maybe there are young bike riders out there that are being priced out of being part of the sport. Do you think that is true? I guess, Brad, maybe to contrast with your background and growing up, would you be able to do today what you did as a junior cyclist?
Probably not. No, no. But I was also helped quite a lot by whatever the industry at that time. There was a company called Serious Bikes in Wolverhampton. Frank Clements kindly gave me a frame. I had to find all the other equipment for it. And it was Chris Hoy's old frame, actually, kilometre bike, and I had it sprayed yellow. And without people like that in that time, companies back then, they didn't get a lot back. Condor Cycles in London were very good to me by the time I started, achieving stuff as a junior. I couldn't have done it without those small sort of shops, and they weren't making the type of money that shops made during the boom, if you like, within cycling. There was not much in return in British racing for that assistance. But you had it, didn't you, at Midridge, with Paul Donoghue and that. There was always the local ones, but and I don't think any of us could have even back then afforded a bike, or the parents certainly couldn't, because as middle class of a sport as it was in the 90s, it was still very kind of working class in the north, certainly in towns, some towns and where you were from, and and I think cycling appealed. It was I was an outsider as a kid, and so it appealed to me. Whereas now, again, that's probably changed a little bit now in terms of some ways, but in other ways, cycling does attract a certain type of person, I think, as well. There's something about cycling that attracts a certain characteristic. Because there's a lot of odd people in cycling, isn't there? There are.
There's a lot of odd people in cycling.
There are, but to do what you do, even like Pogacar, he's an odd fella, isn't he? In his character and that, and as talented as he is. But I've never been in a team with lots. There's not a normal crop of cyclists. Everyone's different, and there's different, because you have to be a little bit different to I think, go through the pain barriers that you do in cycling. And it's very unique in that sense to other team sports, because as much as a team sport as it is, you still have to pedal the bike. It's very much an individual effort.
Yeah, and like the equipment, like now it's like Formula One, and I think that actually can be a barrier in itself, because I think the perception that you can't compete if you haven't got the best bike, that is something that's been trickling through a little bit. As a talent coach, we used to see it like with the under 12s, under 10s, under 16s, so on, where people are buying carbon bikes already when they're 10 years old and things. And that's just natural in the development of sport. But I think, coming back to perspective, it plays a part, but it's not the most defining thing in moving forward successfully. But it is a barrier, because bikes are expensive.
Felix, have you experienced that in your progression through the sport so far?
I think definitely, like...
Riding your Pinarello last year.
So like, when I was younger, my dad especially was always very big on not having like the best stuff when you're younger, and as you get better, you almost earn the better equipment. And he always said that if you are lucky enough one day to get on a pro team, if you've had the best equipment the whole way up your cycling career, and you get on a pro team, but maybe they don't have the best equipment, you've then got to have like that mental like challenge of knowing that you're on something slower than actually what you've got in your garage at home. Like, so I think it's very difficult for like people like me, seeing the kids when you're that age, all on these carbon bikes, like Ultegra Di2, like just everything you could ask for. And then you're on, like, I used to ride on like Isla bikes when I was younger. You kind of see that, and it's like, you don't understand at that age. It's like, it's just not fair. Like, why can't I have that Ultegra Di2 when I'm 10, and I'm just going to go and chuck it around a car park, scratch it along a tarmac, and like, you just don't understand, do you, when you're that old?
I think that probably, just as an observation, probably one of the big places that we experienced and saw that this year was, we went to a few stage races. There'd be a time trial, and you would know, as a team going into that, there were riders in our team. We don't have time trial bikes that we can't afford to give those to the riders for the 3-4 times they'll ride them over the course of the year. But you'd go to the race knowing that rider, there's no point in them wanting to race for the GC, because they're going to lose a minute straight away just through the equipment that they've got. And I wonder what people's view is on whether the sport needs to do something about that at the lower levels? It all used to be about gear restrictions, right? That was the playing field level.
That, actually, that's quite an interesting point. We were 52-14 as juniors, right? Where we were, so everyone would look for 14-up cassettes, riding Peter Buckley's and stuff. And particularly on the track, I'm not sure how they handle that now, because now the gears they're riding in team pursuiting, and we saw Josh Charlton the other week doing that amazing individual pursuit. The gears they ride now, the leap, back then we'd leap 6 or 7 inches in gears, now they go to 30, and I'm not too sure what impact that has on them and how much you can prepare for that. And maybe that does eliminate it because of the torque we're producing now and stuff, but the road's a bit different because the gear is pretty much have stayed the same.
But in terms of, I guess...
But the powers have gone up.
Yeah.
And the speeds have gone up.
But also in terms of the lightness of the equipment that's available, the aero that's available, those sorts of things. Do you think that the sport... I think there is a rule with youth riders, isn't there? They can't have deep section wheels beyond a certain thing, but does that need to percolate further down or up in the sport, do you think?
Don't know, Phil.
It's tricky, I think. Like, I used to work at British Cycling some years ago in the competition department. This was a perennial question. Every year it was like... or should them under 8s be riding those wheels? And I think it's a balance because some of those wheels are just hand-me-downs from an older brother or somebody in a club or something. So if you make a really strict regulation on something for kids that are really young, you potentially put them at a bigger disadvantage because maybe they've got that stuff for free and have to go and buy something else. So it's a balance act. I still come back to the fact that the biggest thing that makes a difference on the bike is the rider. The bike does play a part, and as you get further up the ladder, those marginal gains, that famous catchphrase, every team is paying attention to that. So when you're in the World Tour, riding the Tour de France or, World's Time Trial, Olympic Final, every rider's got everything with and that's chuff. Further down the pipeline, that's an official technical phrase, of course, it's less relevant. Because there's just different things in play. And also with road racing, it's less relevant unless you're riding a solo break.
I'm going to suggest that we'll probably do one more topic with you guys, and then we'll wrap up the live feed. And then I suggest what we're going to do is we'll do some live Q&A here behind closed doors, as it were, in the room, if you're all up for that in a couple of minutes. So I think to wrap up the live feed, I wanted to ask... For junior cyclists today, I want you all to maybe think about what would be your kind of key piece or pieces of advice that you would want to give someone coming into the junior ranks and aspiring for a career in professional cycling. Who wants to pick that one up first? Start with the young man.
I think the thing that everyone always says to me, which you always, whenever you ask someone, they always say this, is enjoy it. And I think it's one of the things that I look back on from when I was like under 14, under 16, is that you think, enjoy it. It's only under 14s, under 16s. Obviously you don't think that when you're a junior. You think, this is it, this is the big time. So I do think enjoy it. I think you've got to believe in yourself. I think there's a lot of people that will look good on the start lines and will have all these fancy kits, and there'll be talk of riders on have got development contracts for next year. I think you've just got to accept that's the case. And there's always going to be them ones that have got that. So I think just keeping focused and just doing your own thing, and everyone does develop slightly different, different rates, and over the 2 years you change loads. So I think just focus on what you're doing. Maybe I'm not the best person to ask, because I am a junior.
Pretty good question, answer for me.
Yeah, I always thought that whole enjoyment thing was rubbish, because nothing enjoyable about racing, professional. I never really enjoyed the racing. I enjoyed the outcome. But on that enjoyment thing, it took me sort of 40 years to work out what I saw in that. And I would say to anyone is the ability to listen and to your surroundings, because lots of the times the biggest downfall for lots of talented juniors is their ego. And the fact, like you said, they're a nightmare to work with. Lots of juniors that were great just won't listen to any advice, won't listen to people around, won't take criticism and stuff like that. So I think what I would say is enjoy the process. Enjoy learning and listen to people and observe. Look at the people around you, see what the best people are doing. Listen, and because you're going to get a lot of that through your career, and people say you shouldn't listen to everyone because then you end up making. But as at a young age, not one person's going to have all the answers because everyone's different. So just listen. The best riders, I've always thought, are the ones who are the most coachable, because they're the ones who tend to listen and think about what they're doing and are open to change and advice and accepting fault and taking responsibility and accountability for their career. So I think that's a big one. Just enjoy the process. And in doing that, you'll enjoy seeing the progression. Progression's the big thing that drives us all. If you see a progression in what you're doing, that's where you'll get the enjoyment.
That's a really, really good answer.
That's a bloody great answer.
It was, yeah, wasn't it?
Yeah, thanks for that, Bradley. I'll follow that with a great answer.
I didn't even know I was going to say that. It came to me.
I think the biggest point from what you just said, mate, is be coachable. You got to be coachable. I think you got to work hard and you got to be consistent and be open-minded. I think if you can go on in that mindset and tick those boxes, you'll learn a lot and you'll move forward a lot. If you go into it with an idea, it's all about the result and it's always going to be nice and fun, you'll get a wake-up call. I was kind of like the opposite. I loved the racing but hated the training. And I wish what I know now I knew then, because hindsight's 20/20, right? But I think if you understand that hard work does pay you back. And
it came easy to you though, didn't it? Do you think that was your downfall?
Yeah, it does.
No, seriously, because when we were juniors, you were beating the men. You were racing. You were too good to be a junior. You were streaks of. I remember this. No, but you see what I just said about like observing and look. I was watching this man like a hawk when I was 15 because Phil would get up. Phil was on the track, and you were dominant, weren't you? And James was the only one who could get near you. James Notley. Yeah, and. You stepped up within the first year. You medalled at the senior nationals, got third in the points race, didn't you? Yeah. In '96, behind Rob Hales and Johnny Clay.
And a bloody good memory.
No, because I was watching, and I was watching what was going on, and that was you got a medal at the Madisons '97, didn't you? Yeah. So there was. Then I remember in '98 you got third in the last stage of Tour of Lengths. Yeah. I watched that when you got third in the last stage of the Tour of Lengths. Yeah. So I was watching, I'll tell you what shoes he had on.
Accurate.
Yeah, Shimano SPR one, yeah. Anyway, but it's that's because I was just like a sponge to information. I'd watch all the best and so there was a pathway, of what you could do. And that's, if you're looking at your surroundings and what are the demands of what I want to do. And you're not conscious of this. I wasn't thinking at 15 because, what the demands of what I want to do. But I was just, a sponge for information, to watch what everyone else is doing. When the other guys were on the track, when we talk about them in junior sessions when I was 15, all the others would be messing around, trying to get into the other girls' knickers who were in the track centre over 15. That's what lads thought about at 15 when I was a kid. But I was watching, sadly, the weird I was watching these guys do their 2K. And seeing how Phil changes and stuff like that, and that's why I was a pervert of the sport and not other things, and but that served me well because I could remember what shoes he was wearing and things like that, But I'll say another thing. I just said to him before we came on air. Remember this training camp we did in Lanzarote with Caroline Alexander and everyone. I still remember this day. Phil touched 1,000 miles that week, and we went for a current bun that night because he'd done 1,000 miles. And I can still remember, I could remember all those sort of little things. Phil did 1,000 miles in a week, 7 days in Lanzarote. Like that's putting the miles in, So it's interesting, because I was useless at school, left with nothing, but my education, I've got a degree in late 90s junior cycling. Can't use it for anything other than this talk. But
I think that's a slightly strange but apt place to wrap up the live feed. So I just want to say a massive thank you to Phil and to Brad and to Felix for joining us in the room this evening. I think just a big round of applause as we say goodbye to our online audience.